Hi, everybody. I'm Ashley Tracy, and this is the Wholistic Soul podcast. And I'm sitting here, it's like 5:30 in the morning, and it's still dark outside, and just thinking, let's do a little podcast intro. But I didn't want to go about it in this very, structured way. I wanted to just have a conversation and introduce myself to those of you who may not know me and may not have ever worked with me or connected with me. And I hope we get a chance to do so in the future, even if it's just you listening to me talk about random things. Not really random, but just things that I'm so curious and interested about. So I actually, I don't want to do like a typical bio. I want to kind of just dive right in because that's my style and say a little bit about kind of my journey. I was actually on a date last night and someone asked me what started my spiritual awakening or this journey that I'm on. And I was like, well, it's a long story, but the gist of it is basically I've always been really drawn to more spiritual, metaphysical things in my life. When I was younger, my mom had a drawer in her nightstand where she had a tarot deck and an astrology book. It was the only astrology book you'll ever need. Very intro. It's actually a really great book. And when I was a kid, I was always really drawn to it and interested in it. And, I found out later, my mom told me that my great-grandmother used to read cards. I actually have them on my altar in my healing room right now, her original deck, which back in the day looked like playing cards because, wasn't as widely accepted as it is today. So I think they kind of had to hide what they were doing back then. But it's really special that I have those. I'm very grateful for that. So it's in my lineage, in my ancestral lineage. But I've always been very intuitive. And a lot of children are, but we let societal conditioning or our minds take over and we disconnect from that intuition, which that happened to me too. Life happened, and I was always very interested in science, love science. And I went a very traditional science route in education to kind of satiate that curiosity of wanting to know why. So my undergrad's in biology and chemistry, and then my master's degree is in nutrition. And so I loved, especially nutritional biochem. I think it's so fascinating what happens when we consume things. And all the way down to our DNA level, nutrigenomics is a field that fascinated me. So the curiosity was always there. And if you look at my birth chart, you could probably say it's all my Sagittarius energy that loves to explore and experience things. But it wasn't until I had just finished grad school. I had some family drama. I have some previous posts. You can read about that. We'll get into that in another episode. We'll keep this one a little bit lighthearted today. And it wasn't until I was 29 years old, going through my Saturn return, the first one, and which is a pretty big point in everyone's life. We all have that Saturn return energy at the age of around 29. It kind of starts between 28 years old and then 29, and then we feel it into about our early 30th birthday. But that's a pivotal point in all of our lives where we're really told to leave behind outdated structures and really mature and move toward and master something. And I had just finished my master's degree. I was going for my PhD, and I was teaching at the university as a TA. I actually got my first adjunct teaching job. That's where I fell in love with teaching, was when I was in grad school. But I was in a very dark place personally, not processing a lot of the trauma that I went through when I was younger. Finding yoga really started me on the healing journey to get back to myself and to get back to my interest in spirituality. And because yoga to me is a way of grounding into the body, and I was living a life so disassociated, thanks to my Aquarius rising and my trauma, that when I started practicing yoga when I was in grad school, it was really centering and grounding. And I started practicing mantra, specifically the Ganesh mantra. Like I would put it on in the car as I'm driving to school and repeat the mantra over and over. And it really started me on that path to come back to myself. So one of the things that I will talk a lot about, and I mention, it's written in my name, The Wholistic Soul, and on my website, Guiding You Back to Wholeness, is because we're all whole and we're born that way. And especially when we're kids, we're so connected to that sense of our soul and the deeper sense of like wholeness that we have. And then we go to school and we have external influences, and they all kind of create these stories, these narratives that we're not whole, that we need external things to validate us, and we have to prove things. And it's just this societal construct that makes us feel like we're not whole and something is missing and we have to look for something outside of ourselves. And to me, when I started my journey with yoga, it was the first step of coming back home to that part of myself. I wasn't fully feeling my wholeness back then, but it was the first step. And then I got this very strong intuitive hit that I needed to leave my hometown of Miami, Florida, where I was currently going to grad school, and all of the drama and trauma that was the home wound. And I got this really strong intuitive nudge, and it was like, it's time to go. And I said, okay, where? And it was the first time I actually was able to listen to myself. You know, I was so in my head all the time. I'm a lot of air. I'm a lot of Libra and Aquarius in my birth chart. So I lived in the mind. The mind was a comfortable place. The body was very uncomfortable. And anybody who's experienced any sort of trauma, especially for me with sexual trauma, you know, the body isn't a safe place. And so the mind that's a safe place. But I was really starting to get into my body with yoga. And so I was like starting to really connect to that intuition. And that intuition was like, you got to go. And I said, where do I go? And I got this intuitive, hey, go to Denver. Cool. I'm living in South Florida. I grew up on the ocean. You want me to go where it snows? And it's landlocked and there's no water, but there's these beautiful mountains. I had never really been to Denver. I think I flew into Denver one time with my dad and brother when we went skiing when I was very, very young, but I didn't remember it. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to trust this really strong intuitive hit. And so about 2 weeks later, I packed up my whole life into my SUV, ended a 4-year relationship with a very beautiful person who we are still friends to this day, and understood that I needed to leave. So that was wonderful. And I drove out to Denver, Colorado, found a place to live, didn't really know anybody, and just trusted that intuitive hit. And that was scary, but also my Sagittarius moon loves change. So I wasn't too scared. I just trusted whatever came through to me. And once I moved here, the focus was really on exploring my sense of self, who I am, and without all of these narratives and stories, and even the story of I was a victim of some trauma, you know, shifting that perspective. And I started by looking at my birth chart, since I was always interested in astrology, and it made sense to me. It was a language. I say that astrology is a language. It's a language of the soul, having a human experience here on Earth, and it's our blueprint to kind of understand ourselves. And so I started looking at my birth chart. I started reading a lot of books. One book in particular really changed my life. And if you've ever had a conversation with me about it, I probably have told you that I love the book. It's called Your Soul's Plan by Robert Schwartz. And it's about the pre-birth planning before you come here on Earth and why we choose certain things. And that was really helpful for me to dive into a different way of thinking about our human experiences, whether those experiences are considered bad, hard, difficult, or beautiful. And, most of the time we are really so focused as humans on the things that have gone wrong, right? And so it was really helpful for me to understand this perspective, and it got my mind going. And once I'm on something, like I'll go down that rabbit hole. So the combination of reading all of these spiritual books and astrology really started I don't want to say, yes, an awakening, but it's a remembering, right? It's a remembering that there is more to this existence than the everyday grind. But that's not to say that the everyday mundane things of being human aren't important. They are. But it's like, how do you integrate both? And to me, that's where I really love to do this work. It's about finding the integration between the sacred and the spiritual and the everyday, because we chose to come here and have this human experience. So we've got to learn how to be these spiritual, soulful beings having human experience. So that kind of got me into really opening up to astrology and diving into my chart. And as soon as I read my birth chart, I was like, oh my God, I get this. Not my first lifetime doing this, right? Like it makes sense to me. And then I started reading the book Many Lives, Many Masters to understand really deep karmic relationships and karmic experiences between, people. That was triggered by a relationship I had after moving out here that was so intense, like so strong. Like I had never felt like such a deep intensity with somebody before. And we only dated for 6 months, but it devastated me, right? I ended a 4-year relationship moving out here to Colorado, and I was like, bye, cool, great, no big deal. But I, connect with this one soul who just, I can't even describe that feeling. Many of you probably have had those connections before. And we'll do a whole talk on soulmates and twin flames because we get that all wrong. But anyways, I wanted to understand why I could feel so strongly about someone that I barely knew. And so I started reading Many Lives, Many Masters by Dr. Brian Weiss. So it had to do with past life regression. And then Only Love is Real is his other book about soulmate reincarnation. And then I got really interested in past life work. And then I found Dr. Linda Backman's book, she happened to live in Colorado, like 20 minutes away from me. So then I booked my first past life regression with Linda. And I was a little nervous because meditation had always been hard for me, being very heady and air sign strong. And so I was a little nervous I couldn't drop in, but I went to her office when she used to do in-person regressions and had a beautiful, profound experience that really, with past life work, shifted. Like I was able to really connect to why this person that I barely knew like really turned my world upside down and like pushed me to even go deeper into spirituality and into my soul and into the exploration of this life. And that sparked my love of past life work, which I had always studied from an astrology level, because when I look at a birth chart and you look at the lunar nodes, for example, you can see past life themes. I'll do a whole episode on that. It's my jam. But going through past life regression, how I explain past life regression work to clients, and I know that I'm going on all these tangents, but like the story, I gotta give you the full story, is that it's very similar to psychedelic work in the sense of you create new neural pathways, but without substance, right? You're actually going through a hypnosis, a guided meditation into this space. And oftentimes when we come to Earth, our memories, our soul memories are kind of wiped clean, right? Like we have amnesia in a way. We'll have little nudges, especially when we're little, we're super connected to our soul. We'll have nudges of, oh, I remember this. This seems familiar, right? But we don't really know the details. But when you do past life work, you can actually go in and get the details. In astrology, I can see the themes and some details. Intuitively, I'll pick up some details for people. But you really get the full-on experience when you're in regression, because your mind now can see the memory and make the connection and create a new neural pathway to that memory, so that when it comes up again in your current life, you can say, oh, that's why, right? I can give it a why. Because our brains work that way. They work in the sense of like, I want to know why. How do I tie it to something tangible? And with karmic situations and past life things that are coming through, we don't often have a connection to this lifetime. It's connecting to a memory in a past life. And so we go through, for example, with these unconscious, subconscious things coming up for us, but yet we have nothing to tie it to. So our brains can't be satiated in a way and be like, oh, that's why. Like we can't get to the why. And so when you do past life work, it helps you create a tie to a memory in a past life, so that when that issue comes up moving forward, you have something to validate it. It's like, I'm not crazy, right? I'm not making this up. Like there was a reason. And ultimately, that's like the potent healing potential of this work. And I find the same thing with astrology. Astrology is very validating. Astrology to me is a tool of self-awareness. It is not a predictive, like, end all be all. Whenever I do a reading for someone, it's the feedback I always get is, wow, like I feel seen and understood and like so validated, because this is something that I deeply feel, but I couldn't understand why. And that's the beauty of this work, any of this work. And there's so many different tools: astrology, past life work, energy work, all of it. Like they're all tools to help us come back to remembering that we're whole and we are love incarnated and we are just beautiful beings having this human experience. And we don't need to prove anything. We don't need to be, I don't know. It's just, I think, why not use these tools that a lot of ancient cultures and traditions really relied upon, but now in our Western society we say, and we call them woo-woo. They're not woo-woo. They've been around longer than most things. And just be open-minded and curious about it. And that's kind of a long-winded, almost 20-minute explanation as to why I want to talk about these things. And hopefully you want to listen to them. And if not, that's okay too. Like, I trust this will find whoever needs to hear it. And I'm going to be very honest. I'm not a super rigid person in the sense of I get an intuitive hit to record and I'll record. And that's kind of going to be the flow of this podcast. Last time I tried to do a podcast a couple years ago, but I really tried to do it like how everybody else does with the structure. And then I'm like, my Aquarius rising is like, nah, that doesn't work for me. And my Sag moon's like, nah, I got to feel it. I got to feel like when I want to record. But I really love questions. So if you have questions, leave a comment. You can also email me. My email is Ashley, ASHLEY, at AshleyTracy, TRACEY.com. I love questions, so please email me. I didn't mention, but I'm also a professor. So I'm that teacher that loves my students to ask questions so I can really relate it to whatever they're experiencing at the moment. So that's kind of what this podcast will be. Sometimes it'll be 5 a.m. recordings of me talking about things that I think, hey, maybe people want to hear about this. Maybe they're curious about it. So all I ask is that you have an open mind and be curious and allow whatever I say to see if what resonates with you. Because at the end of the day, it's all about going back to yourself and to your soul and having a conversation with your soul and saying, like, does this resonate for me or does it not? Because that's ultimately your guiding light, is what's internal. Yes, this is an external thing you're listening to, but with all of the work that I do, and if you ask any of my clients, for example, they'll come to me and they'll be like, tell me this. And I was like, no, I will tell you about the energy that's influencing you, but ultimately I'm always going to go back to, how does that resonate for you? How does that make you feel? Are you curious about that? Like, how could you explore that within yourself? Because that's what we need more of. We need less of, for example, on social media, people saying, do it this way. No, one size does not fit all. I actually just did a post about nutrition and your moon sign and how important it is to understand that every single physical body is different to how we react to things. So with all of this noise of these people saying, you should do this or you should do that, it's not going to work for you. The only way to know if something works for you is to explore how you feel when you do it and how your body feels. And so before I keep ranting, because I will on that subject, I think it's just ultimately what I'm saying is listen. Does it resonate? Does it not? Let me know. Give me feedback. Ask me questions. Share it with people. Maybe it'll resonate with somebody you know, and they need to hear it in that moment. And that's the beauty of connecting and sharing our stories. It's less about telling people what they should do and more about sharing our experiences so people feel seen and heard if they have experienced the same thing or if they're curious about whatever I'm talking about, right? Like it's that entryway into that more soulful exploration. And that's what I hope this podcast does. So yeah, I'm gonna end it there. And I'm excited to see what comes through on the next recording. Who knows? You never know. And that's the fun of it. So, okay, until next time.